Imagine clipping coupons to buy baby clothes while your husband secretly sits on over $1 million. Sarah thought she knew her life until she walked into a bank and everything exploded. Her CEO husband publicly shoved his pregnant wife, but the bank manager who stepped in changed everything with 4 shocking words: "I'm your uncle." What Sarah discovered next about her family, her money, and her husband's terrifying past would save her life and destroy his forever. This story has 3 devastating betrayals: a house fire that was no accident, and a newborn fighting for life while her mother fights for freedom. Trust me, you won't see the ending coming. Hit that like button if you're ready for a wild ride. Drop a comment with your biggest shock moment, and subscribe because stories like this don't come around every day. Let's dive in. Sarah Collins sat at her kitchen table, 7 months pregnant and surrounded by a mountain of overdue bills. The cramped apartment felt smaller each day as her belly grew larger. She carefully cut coupons from grocery store flyers, her wedding ring catching the morning light as she worked. "Every dollar counts," she whispered to herself, placing a 50-cent coupon for baby formula in her growing pile. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was preparing to feed a child while rationing food for herself. The phone rang, jolting her from her concentration. The caller ID showed Riverside Medical Center. "Mrs. Mitchell, this is Janet from billing. We need to discuss your outstanding balance of $2,400 for your prenatal care." Sarah's stomach dropped. "I thought my husband's insurance covered those appointments." "According to our records, the insurance claim was denied for non-payment of premiums. We need a payment plan established immediately, or we'll have to suspend your care." After hanging up, Sarah stared at the phone in disbelief. David had assured her their insurance was current. She grabbed his laptop from the counter, knowing his password was always the same combination of his birthday and their anniversary. The screen lit up, showing his email inbox. Sarah scrolled through, looking for insurance correspondence, when a subject line caught her eye: Riverside Business Bank Statement, account ending in 7928. She clicked the email, her hands beginning to shake as the numbers appeared on screen. The account balance showed $847,000. Sarah blinked hard, thinking her pregnancy brain was playing tricks on her. She scrolled down to see monthly deposits ranging from $15,000 to $30,000. This was money she knew nothing about, in an account she'd never heard of. Her phone buzzed with a text from David: "Working late again tonight. Don't wait up." Sarah took a screenshot of the bank statement and opened another email, then another, and another. By the time she finished, she'd discovered 4 separate business accounts with a combined balance of over $1.2 million. While she'd been clipping coupons and worrying about buying baby clothes, her husband had been sitting on enough money to pay for their child's college education 3 times over. The betrayal hit her like a physical blow. For 2 years of marriage, David had controlled every penny, telling her his tech company was struggling, that they needed to be careful with money. He'd made her feel guilty for every small purchase while secretly hoarding a fortune. Sarah grabbed her purse and car keys. It was time for answers. The drive to Riverside Business Bank took 20 minutes. 20 minutes Sarah spent rehearsing what she would say. By the time she pulled into the parking lot, her hands had stopped shaking, and her resolve had hardened into something unbreakable. The marble floors of Riverside Business Bank gleamed under crystal chandeliers as Sarah approached the customer service desk. The teller, a young woman with kind eyes, looked up with a professional smile. "How can I help you today?" "I need to speak with someone about my husband's business accounts. David Mitchell from Mitchell Tech Solutions." The teller's expression shifted slightly. "Let me get our business banking manager for you. Please have a seat." Sarah lowered herself into a leather chair, her pregnant belly making the movement awkward. Around her, Well-dressed professionals conducted their banking in hushed tones. She felt out of place in her discount store maternity clothes and scuffed shoes. Mrs. Mitchell. A distinguished man in his 50s approached her. His silver hair was perfectly styled, and his charcoal suit probably cost more than Sarah's monthly grocery budget. "I'm James Wellington, business banking manager. How can I assist you? My husband has accounts here that I didn't know about. Substantial accounts. I need to understand what's going on." James's expression became carefully neutral. "I'd be happy to discuss this with you, but I'll need proper authorization. Are you listed on the accounts?" "I don't know. David handles all our finances. He told me we were struggling, but I found bank statements showing over $1 million. James studied Sarah's face intently, as if trying to place her. "Your maiden name, if you don't mind me asking." "Collins. Sarah Elizabeth Collins." "Why?" The color drained from James's face. He gripped the back of his chair, staring at Sarah as if he'd seen a ghost. "Excuse me for just one moment." He stepped away and made a quick phone call, his voice too low for Sarah to hear. When he returned, his demeanor had completely changed. There was warmth in his eyes now, and something that looked almost like tears, like, "Sarah, I think we need to have a longer conversation. Would you mind stepping into my office?" Before Sarah could respond, the bank's main doors burst open with enough force to turn heads throughout the lobby. David Mitchell strode across the marble floor, his face flushed with anger, and his expensive suit wrinkled as if he'd rushed from an important meeting. "Sarah," his voice cracked like a whip across the quiet banking floor. "What the hell are you doing here?" Every conversation in the lobby stopped. Sarah felt her face burn with embarrassment as dozens of eyes turned toward them. "David, I need to understand about these accounts. You have no right to be here discussing my private business affairs." David reached her in 3 quick strides, towering over her seated form. "Our business affairs. We're married." "Lower your voice," David hissed, glancing around at the growing audience. "You're embarrassing yourself." Sarah stood up, her hands instinctively going to her pregnant belly. "I'm embarrassing myself. You've been lying to me for 2 years about our finances while I've been—" I said, "Lower your voice." The words came out as a shout that echoed off the marble walls. James Wellington stepped forward, his expression stern. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm going to have to ask you to— don't tell me what to do." David spun toward his wife, his face contorted with rage. "And don't you ever come behind my back again." It happened so fast that Sarah barely registered the movement. David's hand connected with her shoulder, pushing her backward with enough force to make her stumble. Her pregnant body, already off balance, couldn't recover quickly enough. Sarah's hip struck the marble pillar behind her as she fell, sending sharp pain through her lower back. She gasped, her hands flying to her belly as she felt the baby kick frantically in response to her elevated heart rate. The entire lobby fell silent except for the sound of Sarah's labored breathing. James Wellington moved faster than his age would suggest possible, reaching Sarah before David could say another word. His face was stone-cold fury as he helped her to her feet. "Are you hurt? Do we need to call an ambulance?" Sarah's hands remained protective over her belly. "I think I'm okay. The baby's moving." James turned to David with the kind of controlled rage that was more terrifying than shouting. "Mr. Mitchell, you just assaulted a pregnant woman in my bank. Security is already calling the police." David's aggressive posture faltered. It was hardly an assault. She's being dramatic. "I saw what I saw. And so did everyone else here." James gestured to the dozen customers and employees who were staring in shock. 2 security guards approached, flanking David on either side. David straightened his tie, trying to regain his composure. This is a misunderstanding. Sarah is pregnant and emotional. Sometimes she needs firm guidance. The words made Sarah's blood sing. Firm guidance, you pushed me. Perhaps we should continue this conversation in my office, James suggested, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. As they walked toward the executive offices, James whispered to Sarah, "There are things you need to know about your family, things your husband clearly doesn't want you to discover." David overheard and laughed bitterly. "Family Sarah's parents are dead. She has no family except me and that baby." James stopped walking and turned to face David. "Mr. Mitchell, you're wrong about that. Very wrong." In his office, James opened a locked drawer and pulled out a manila folder. Inside were photographs, documents, and what looked like legal papers. "Sarah, your mother was Elizabeth Collins before she married your father. But what you probably don't know is that Elizabeth was my sister." Sarah felt the world tilt. "That's impossible. My parents told me they had no family." "Your parents told you what they believed was best. When your mother died in that car accident 10 years ago, we tried to find you. Your father had moved, changed his name from Collins to Mitchell, and we lost the trail." James spread several photographs across his desk. Sarah gasped when she saw them. Her mother, younger than Sarah remembered, standing next to James at what looked like a family gathering. The resemblance between Sarah and her mother was unmistakable. The Collins family built a successful construction business over 3 generations. When your mother died, her share of the family trust was set aside for you, with compound interest over 10 years. That trust is now worth $3.2 million. David's face had gone pale. "That's impossible. Sarah doesn't have money. She's nobody special." "Mr. Mitchell," James said quietly, "Sarah is my niece. And for the past 2 years, as her legal spouse, you've been withdrawing money from her trust fund, approximately $4,000 per month, which you've been depositing into accounts she knew nothing about." The room spun around Sarah as the pieces fell into place. The mysterious business income, David's insistence on handling all their finances, his anger whenever she asked questions about money. "You've been stealing from me," she whispered. David stood up abruptly. "I've been managing our finances responsibly. That money was community property anyway." "No, Mr. Mitchell, it wasn't." James pulled out another document. "The trust specifically states that funds can only be accessed by the primary beneficiary or with their written, notarized consent. Sarah never signed anything, did she?" Sarah shook her head, tears beginning to flow. "I didn't even know it existed." "This is insane," David said, pacing to the window. "Some crazy old man shows up claiming to be family, and you believe him over your own husband." James handed Sarah a birth certificate. "This is your mother's original birth certificate, Elizabeth Marie Collins, born in Riverside, California, sister to James Robert Collins." He showed her his own identification. "I changed my name to Wellington for business reasons, but legally, I'm still James Collins." Sarah studied the documents, her mind reeling. Everything about her life, everything she'd believed about herself and her family, had been built on lies. "How much has he taken?" she asked quietly. James consulted another paper. "Including interest and investment penalties, approximately $96,000 over 2 years." "Sarah, you're not thinking clearly." David said, his tone becoming pleading. "You're 7 months pregnant. Your hormones are affecting your judgment. This man is obviously running some kind of scam. But Sarah wasn't listening to David anymore. She was looking at a photograph of her mother holding a baby. Written on the back in faded ink were the words, "Elizabeth with baby Sarah, age 6 months. She looks happy," Sarah said softly. She was. Your mother was brilliant, kind, and absolutely devoted to you. When she died, we wanted to honor her memory by taking care of you. We never got the chance. James looked directly at David. Until now. 3 days later, Sarah sat in her uncle's living room, feeling safe for the first time in years. James's house was modest but comfortable, with family photographs covering every surface, photographs that included her mother, and now, photographs that included her. "The lawyer will be here in an hour," James said, setting a cup of herbal tea beside her chair. "Robert Thompson is the best family attorney in the county. He's handled all our legal matters for 20 years. Sarah nodded, still struggling to process how quickly her life had changed. "I keep expecting David to show up and drag me back home. He won't. The restraining order is very clear. He can't come within 500 feet of you or this house." The doorbell rang, and James went to answer it. Sarah heard a familiar woman's voice and felt her heart lift for the first time in days. "Sarah." Her sister Emma rushed into the living room, tears streaming down her face. "Oh my God, when James called me, I couldn't believe it. Are you okay? Is the baby okay?" Emma was 2 years younger than Sarah, with the same dark hair and green eyes. She lived 3 hours away in Sacramento, working as a nurse at a children's hospital. The sisters had grown apart after their parents' death, mainly because David had discouraged the relationship. "I'm okay," Sarah said, accepting Emma's fierce hug. "Better than okay, actually. For the first time in 2 years, I feel like I can breathe." Emma pulled back to study her sister's face. "You look different. Stronger, somehow." "I feel stronger. I feel like myself again." James returned with Robert Thompson, a distinguished man in his 60s who carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd won more cases than he'd lost. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, shaking Sarah's hand. "I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances, but I want you to know we're going to make sure you and your baby are protected." Over the next hour, Thompson explained the legal process they would follow: divorce proceedings, custody arrangements, and most importantly, criminal charges against David for financial theft. "The evidence is overwhelming," Thompson said, reviewing the bank statements James had provided. "Your husband systematically stole nearly $100,000 from your trust fund. In California, that's grand theft, punishable by up to 3 years in prison." Sarah felt a grim satisfaction hearing those words. David had controlled her for so long, made her feel powerless and dependent. Now the law was on her side. "What about the baby?" Emma asked. "Can he fight for custody?" Given his criminal behavior and the documented domestic violence at the bank, I doubt any judge would grant him unsupervised visitation, let alone custody, Thompson replied. "Sarah has a strong case." That evening, after Thompson and Emma had left, Sarah sat on James's back porch, watching the sunset. For the first time since she'd gotten pregnant, she felt optimistic about the future. James joined her with 2 glasses of iced tea. "How are you feeling?" "Hopeful, scared, but hopeful." "Is it wrong that I'm excited about raising this baby on my own?" "Not wrong at all. Your mother felt the same way when she was pregnant with you. She said becoming a mother made her feel capable of anything." Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "I know what you're doing. This isn't over." She showed the message to James, who frowned deeply. I'll call Detective Rodriguez in the morning. This violates the restraining order. He's trying to scare me, Sarah said, but her hands were shaking as she put the phone away. Don't let him. You're not alone anymore. Sarah, you have family, you have resources, and you have the law on your side. That night, Sarah slept better than she had in months. She dreamed of her mother, of the little girl she'd once been, and of the daughter she was about to raise. In her dreams, David was just a bad memory, powerless to hurt her anymore. She woke up 8 hours later to the sound of sirens. Sarah jolted awake to flashing red and blue lights streaming through James's bedroom windows. The digital clock showed 3:17 in the morning. Her first thought was that something had happened to James, but then she heard his voice downstairs talking to what sounded like police officers. She pulled on a robe and made her way downstairs, her pregnant belly making the steps awkward to navigate. In the living room, James stood talking to 2 police officers while EMT personnel packed up their equipment. "What's happening?" Sarah asked. One of the officers, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, turned to her. "Are you Sarah Mitchell?" "Yes." "I'm Officer Martinez. We received a 911 call about 30 minutes ago. Someone reported a domestic disturbance at this address, claiming they heard a woman screaming for help." Sarah looked around the quiet house in confusion. "There was no disturbance. I was sleeping." That's what we determined after investigating. The call appears to have been false. However, we did find evidence of someone being on the property. Officer Martinez led Sarah to the front window and pointed to the flower bed below. Clear boot prints were pressed into the soft soil, and the window screen had been partially removed. "Someone was trying to look into the house," James said grimly. "The security system didn't trigger because they didn't actually break anything." Sarah felt ice forming in her stomach. "David, we can't prove that without evidence," the other officer said, "but given the restraining order and the timing, it's certainly suspicious." After the police left, Sarah sat on the couch with James, both of them too shaken to go back to sleep. "He's not going to stop." "Is he?" Sarah asked. "Men like David don't like losing control, but we'll be ready for him." The next morning brought a call from Robert Thompson with news that should have been encouraging. "The district attorney's office is moving forward with criminal charges," he said. "Grand theft, domestic violence, and now stalking based on last night's incident. David's looking at serious prison time." "That's good news, right?" "It should be." But his lawyer called this morning with a counteroffer. "David's claiming you've been emotionally unstable since discovering your inheritance. He's demanding a psychological evaluation before any custody decisions are made." Sarah felt her hope deflating. "He's using my pregnancy against me." "It's a common tactic: pregnancy hormones, sudden lifestyle changes, family upheaval. A skilled lawyer can make it sound like you're not thinking clearly." That afternoon, Sarah had her evaluation with Dr. Patricia Reeves, a court-appointed psychologist. The session went well, Sarah thought. She answered questions honestly about her marriage, the discovery of her trust fund, and her plans for the future. But 2 days later, Thompson called with devastating news. "Doctor, Reeves's report raises concerns about your ability to make sound decisions during this time of transition. She's recommending temporary custody arrangements pending further evaluation." "What does that mean?" "It means David gets supervised visitation immediately, and if he can demonstrate stability, he could get temporary custody until after the baby is born." Sarah felt her world crashing down around her. How is that possible? He stole from me. He pushed me in public. His lawyer is very good. They're painting you as someone who went from believing she was poor to thinking she's rich overnight. They're arguing that level of psychological adjustment makes you unfit to make major decisions. That evening, as Sarah sat in James's kitchen staring at legal documents she couldn't understand, her phone rang. The caller ID showed David's number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Hello, Sarah." David's voice was calm, almost gentle. "I think it's time we talked like adults. We have nothing to talk about. We have everything to talk about. Our marriage, our baby, our future together." "There is no future together." David. "Sarah, I know you're confused right now. Finding out about this inheritance has obviously been overwhelming, but I'm willing to forgive everything if you'll come home." The audacity of his words left Sarah speechless for a moment. "Forgive me? For what?" "For letting your uncle manipulate you into believing lies about our marriage, for putting our baby at risk with all this stress, for choosing strangers over your own husband. You stole from me. David, you've been lying to me for 2 years. I managed our finances. That's what husbands do. And now look where we are. You're living with a man you barely know. And our baby is going to be born into a broken home." Despite knowing better, Sarah felt the familiar guilt creeping in. David had always been skilled at making her feel responsible for his actions. "The custody hearing is next week." David continued, "You can end all of this right now. Come home, we'll go to counseling together, and we'll raise our daughter as a family." "How do you know it's a girl?" "I've been keeping track of your medical appointments. A good father stays informed." The statement chilled Sarah to the bone. David had been monitoring her medical care without her knowledge. "Stay away from me, David." "Sarah, you're making a mistake that will haunt you forever. Don't let pride destroy our family." After hanging up, Sarah realized David had never once acknowledged what he'd done wrong. In his mind, he was the victim of her unreasonable behavior. James found her crying at the kitchen table 20 minutes later. "He's going to win," she sobbed. "He's going to take my baby." "No, he's not. We won't let that happen. You heard what the lawyer said. The psychologist thinks I'm unstable. David's going to use that to prove I'm unfit." James sat down beside her and took her hand. "Sarah, your mother once told me that the strongest people are those who keep fighting even when the odds are against them. You're stronger than you know. I don't feel strong. You left an abusive marriage. You stood up for yourself in that bank. You've started building a new life from nothing. That takes incredible strength." Sarah wanted to believe him, but fear was overwhelming her hope. David had resources, a good lawyer, and the ability to manipulate any situation to his advantage. What she didn't know was that David was already planning his next move, and it would be far worse than anything she could imagine. Sarah woke up to the smell of smoke. At first, she thought she was dreaming, but as consciousness fully returned, the acrid smell grew stronger. Her bedside clock showed 2:43 in the morning. She sat up in bed, her 7-month pregnant belly making the movement slow and awkward. Outside her window, she could see an orange glow that shouldn't have been there. "Uncle James," she called out, her voice sharp with panic. No response. Sarah struggled to her feet and opened her bedroom door. The hallway was thick with smoke, and she could hear the terrifying crackle of flames somewhere below. "James!" she screamed, covering her nose and mouth with her nightgown. The smoke was getting thicker by the second. Sarah knew she had minutes, maybe less, before the house became a death trap. She dropped to her hands and knees and crawled toward James's bedroom, the cleaner air near the floor giving her precious oxygen. James's room was empty, his bed unslept in. Where was he? The sound of splintering wood came from downstairs, followed by a whoosh of air that made the smoke swirl violently around her. Sarah realized with horror that the fire was spreading faster than should have been possible. She crawled back to her room and grabbed her phone, dialing 911 as she made her way to the window. 911, what's your emergency? Fire, the house is on fire. 1522 Maple Street. Ma'am, are you inside the house? Yes, I'm trapped upstairs. I can't find my uncle. Fire department is on the way. Can you get to a window? Sarah was already working on opening her bedroom window, but years of paint had sealed it shut. She grabbed a jewelry box from her dresser and used it to break the glass, cutting her hand in the process. The drop to the ground was at least 15 feet, too far to jump while pregnant. Behind her, smoke was pouring under the bedroom door now, and she could hear the fire consuming the lower level of the house. Every family photograph, every piece of furniture, every connection to the mother she'd just rediscovered was being destroyed. But worse than the material loss was the growing certainty that this fire wasn't an accident. Sarah heard sirens in the distance as she tore sheets from the bed and began tying them together. Her hands shook as she worked, making knots that might not hold her weight. The makeshift rope was too short, but it would have to do. She tied one end to the radiator and threw the other end out the window. It dangled about 8 feet from the ground. As she climbed out onto the windowsill, Sarah saw James stumbling across the front lawn, supported by a paramedic. Relief flooded through her, even as she lowered herself hand over hand down the sheet rope, her pregnant body making every movement a struggle. She dropped the last few feet and landed hard, pain shooting through her ankle. But she was alive, and so was James. Sarah. James broke away from the paramedic and ran to her, his face streaked with soot. Thank God you're okay. When I couldn't find you. Where were you? I looked in your room. I was in the garage, working on some legal documents for your case. I heard breaking glass and came out to find the living room already engulfed in flames. The fire spread too fast. Sarah, much too fast. They watched from the ambulance as firefighters battled to save what remained of the house, but Sarah could see it was too late. The building that had represented safety, family, and hope was being reduced to ash. Fire Chief Rodriguez approached them as the EMTs checked Sarah's vital signs and the baby's heartbeat. Mr. Wellington, this fire was deliberately set. We found evidence of accelerant in multiple locations. Someone wanted this house to burn fast and hot. Sarah felt her heart stop. Accelerant. Gasoline spread throughout the first floor. The person who did this intended for anyone inside to die. James's face went pale. David. Chief Rodriguez nodded grimly. We've already called the police. Given the restraining order and the timing, he's our primary suspect. But as they spoke, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from David's number. Sad to hear about the fire. Hope everyone's okay. See you at the custody hearing next week. The timestamp showed the message had been sent from 3 hours away, establishing his alibi. He planned this, Sarah whispered. He made sure he'd be somewhere else when it happened. As the last walls of the house collapsed, Sarah realized that David hadn't just destroyed their temporary refuge. He destroyed all the evidence of her family connection, all the photographs and documents that proved her identity as a Collins heir. Without that evidence, her claim to the trust fund would be much harder to prove. And without the trust fund, she'd have no resources to fight him in court. James seemed to read her thoughts. The legal documents are safe. I keep copies in a safety deposit box at the bank. He didn't destroy everything. But Sarah knew David's attack had accomplished something more devastating than destroying evidence. It had shown her that he was willing to commit murder to maintain control. And the custody hearing was still 5 days away. The hotel room smelled like disinfectant and defeat. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the local news coverage of the fire on the small television. The reporter described it as suspicious and mentioned that arson investigators were pursuing leads, but David's alibi was solid. He'd been at a business conference in Los Angeles with dozens of witnesses and hotel records to prove it. He hired someone. Detective Rodriguez had told them earlier that day. "We know he did it, but proving it is another matter entirely." James knocked softly on the adjoining door between their rooms. "How are you feeling?" Sarah looked down at her bandaged hands and her swollen ankle. The baby had been kicking restlessly all day, responding to her elevated stress levels. "Like I'm losing everything," she said honestly. "The insurance will cover rebuilding the house. The trust fund documents are safe. We'll get through this." Before Sarah could respond, her phone rang. Robert Thompson's name appeared on the screen. "I have some difficult news," the lawyer said without preamble. "David's attorney has filed an emergency motion claiming you're now homeless and unable to provide stable housing for a child." Sarah felt the familiar sensation of the world tilting beneath her feet. "We're staying in a hotel temporarily while we find a place to rent." "I know that, and you know that. But David's lawyer is arguing that you've lost your primary residence due to what he's calling questionable associations and poor judgment. They're using the fire as evidence that you put yourself and the baby in danger. He caused the fire, which we can't prove in court. Sarah, I need you to prepare yourself. The judge might grant David temporary custody pending a full investigation of your living situation." After Thompson hung up, Sarah sat in stunned silence. David had orchestrated everything perfectly. The fire had made her homeless, destroyed evidence of her family connections, and given him grounds to claim she was unfit to care for a child. "There's something else," James said quietly. "I got a call from the bank today. Someone has been challenging your identity as my niece. They've requested DNA testing to verify our family relationship. David, his lawyer, most likely. If they can prove you're not my biological niece, they can challenge your access to the trust fund entirely." Sarah felt like she was drowning. Every lifeline David threw her turned out to be an anchor dragging her deeper underwater. That evening, Emma arrived from Sacramento with groceries and an overnight bag. "I'm staying with you until this is resolved," she announced, surveying the depressing hotel room. "Family sticks together." "I'm not sure I can prove we're family anymore," Sarah said, explaining about the DNA testing demand. Emma sat down beside her sister on the bed. "Sarah, do you remember when Mom died? How Dad used to tell us stories about her childhood?" "Not really. I was only 12. He said she grew up poor, that her parents died when she was young. But I always thought there were holes in his story." Sarah looked at her sister with new interest. "What kind of holes?" "Mom knew too much about art, music, culture. She spoke French fluently. She had expensive tastes that didn't match Dad's stories about her humble background." James, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped into the room. "What else do you remember?" Emma thought for a moment. "After the funeral, Dad burned a lot of Mom's belongings. He said it was too painful to keep them. But I saw him burning photographs and letters. Why would someone burn family photos? Because they showed things he didn't want you to see." James said grimly, "There's something else." Emma continued. "A few months before Mom died, she started receiving mail addressed to Elizabeth Collins instead of Elizabeth Mitchell. Dad always threw those letters away, but I saw them. Sarah felt a spark of hope for the first time in days. Do you think she was trying to reconnect with family? I think she knew she was dying, and she wanted to make sure you and I would be taken care of. James pulled out his phone. I'm calling the investigator I used to track you down originally. If your mother was reaching out to us before she died, there might be records of that communication. 3 hours later, private investigator Maria Santos arrived at the hotel with a box of documents. Your uncle hired me 5 years ago to find any living relatives of Elizabeth Collins, Maria explained. I found evidence that Elizabeth had been trying to contact James in the months before her death. Maria spread several papers across the small hotel table. Phone records showing calls from Elizabeth's number to James's business line. A letter she sent to the bank where James worked, asking for help locating her family. And most importantly, this. She held up a handwritten letter dated 2 weeks before Elizabeth's death. Dear James, Sarah read aloud, her voice shaking. If something happens to me, please find my daughters. Their father is a good man, but he's proud, and he may not accept help from family he's never met. Sarah and Emma deserve to know they have people who love them. Sarah looked up at James with tears in her eyes. She was trying to protect us. She was trying to make sure you'd find each other eventually. Maria said, and this letter, along with the DNA test results that are already being processed, should be enough to establish your family connection legally. For the first time since the fire, Sarah felt like she could breathe, but her relief was short-lived. The next morning brought news that would test her resolve in ways she never imagined possible. Sarah was eating breakfast in the hotel restaurant when her phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown number, but something made her answer it. Mrs. Mitchell, this is Officer Chen with the Riverside Police Department. We need you to come to the station immediately. Is this about the fire? Did you arrest someone? Ma'am, I'd prefer to discuss this in person. Can you be here within the hour? The police station smelled like coffee and disappointment. Officer Chen, a serious woman in her 30s, led Sarah to an interview room that felt more like an interrogation chamber. Mrs. Mitchell, we received a report yesterday about suspicious activity at your hotel. Someone claimed to see drug paraphernalia in your room. Sarah stared at her in disbelief. That's impossible. I don't use drugs. I'm 7 months pregnant. I understand your position, but we're required to investigate all reports involving child endangerment. We have a search warrant for your hotel room. Child endangerment? I haven't endangered anyone. Officer Chen's expression remained neutral. If illegal substances are found in your possession while you're pregnant, it constitutes child endangerment under California law. Sarah felt ice forming in her veins. This is David. He's trying to set me up. Mrs. Mitchell, I need you to remain calm. We'll conduct a thorough search, and if nothing is found, you'll be free to go. But 20 minutes later, Officer Chen returned with a small plastic bag containing what looked like marijuana and a glass pipe. These were found in your dresser drawer, underneath your clothing. Sarah's world exploded into fragments. Those aren't mine. I've never used drugs in my life. Ma'am, I need you to turn around and place your hands behind your back. As the handcuffs clicked into place, Sarah realized David had played his final card. Everything else had been preparation for this moment. The fire, the custody challenges, the questioning of her identity. All of it had been designed to drive her to this point where she would be arrested while pregnant. At the county jail, Sarah was processed like any other criminal, fingerprints, photographs, and a humiliating strip search that revealed her pregnant body to strangers who looked at her with a mixture of disgust and pity. Your bail hearing is tomorrow morning. The intake officer informed her, until then, you'll be housed in the medical wing due to your pregnancy. The medical wing was cleaner than the general population cells, but it was still a cage. Sarah sat on the narrow bunk, her hands resting on her belly, trying to convince her unborn daughter that everything would be okay. But everything was not okay. It was 8:30 in the evening when the first contraction hit. Sarah had been to enough prenatal classes to recognize what was happening. The stress, the trauma, the fear it was all triggering early labor at 31 weeks. "Help," she called out, pressing the call button repeatedly. "Something's wrong with my baby." The medical staff responded quickly, but their first concern seemed to be whether Sarah was faking symptoms to get special treatment. "Please," Sarah begged as another contraction gripped her. "My baby is coming too early. She needs to get to a hospital." The next few hours passed in a blur of ambulance sirens, hospital corridors, and medical professionals trying to stop her premature labor. But at 2:17 in the morning, Sarah Elizabeth Collins was born at 31 weeks, weighing 3 pounds and 2 ounces. Sarah was allowed to hold her daughter for exactly 3 minutes before she was taken to the neonatal intensive care unit. 3 minutes to memorize her tiny face, her perfect fingers, her rosebud mouth. "The baby will remain in NICU for at least 6 weeks, Dr. Martinez explained. "Her lungs are underdeveloped, and she'll need intensive medical support." "When can I see her again?" "That depends on your legal situation, Mrs. Mitchell. Child Protective Services has been notified about the circumstances of her birth." Sarah felt her last connection to hope snap. "They're taking her away from me." "A social worker will be here tomorrow to discuss placement options. Given your incarceration and the drug charges, the baby will likely be placed in protective custody." That night, Sarah lay in the hospital bed with her arms empty and her heart shattered. Through the small window in her room, she could see the lights of the NICU where her daughter fought for every breath. Her phone, which had been returned to her at the hospital, buzzed with a text from David. "Heard about the baby. Sorry it came to this. Call me when you're ready to be reasonable." Sarah deleted the message without responding. She had nothing left to give him, nothing left to fight with, nothing left to lose. Or so she thought. The next morning, James and Emma arrived with Robert Thompson and the most important news of Sarah's life. "The DNA results came back," James said, his eyes bright with determination. "You are definitively my niece. The trust fund is legally yours, and David has no claim to it." "It doesn't matter," Sarah said dully. "They're taking my baby. I'm going to prison." "No, you're not," Thompson said firmly. "The investigator found security footage from the hotel showing someone entering your room while you were at dinner. Someone who looked remarkably like David Mitchell." Sarah sat up straighter. "He planted the drugs. We believe so. And more importantly, we can prove it. The charges against you are being dropped, and a warrant has been issued for David's arrest." Emma squeezed her sister's hand. "It's over. Sarah, you won." But Sarah looked toward the NICU where her daughter lay surrounded by machines, and she didn't feel like a winner. "I want to see my baby," she said. And for the first time in weeks, that was actually going to be possible. The neonatal intensive care unit was a maze of beeping machines, bright lights, and tiny humans fighting for life. Sarah approached her daughter's incubator with trembling hands, hardly believing she was finally allowed to be there. Baby Sarah, she decided to name her daughter after herself. Carrying forward the family tradition, was sleeping peacefully despite the tubes and wires surrounding her tiny body. She was beautiful, perfect, and absolutely worth every moment of hell Sarah had endured to protect her. "She's been waiting for you," the NICU nurse said softly. "Her vitals always improve when family visits." Sarah reached through the incubator openings to gently stroke her daughter's impossibly soft cheek. "Hello, sweetheart. Mama's here now." Mrs. Mitchell. A social worker approached with a clipboard and a kind smile. "I'm Linda Castro from Child Protective Services. I wanted to update you on your daughter's status." Sarah tensed, expecting more bureaucratic obstacles. "Given that all charges against you have been dropped and the evidence of your ex-husband's criminal behavior, we're closing the protective custody case. Your daughter will remain in your legal custody throughout her NICU stay." Relief flooded through Sarah like warm water. "Thank you. There is one matter we need to discuss. Mr. Mitchell's attorney contacted our office claiming paternal rights. However, given the criminal charges pending against him, we're recommending the court deny any custody requests." James, who had been quietly observing from a nearby chair, approached with news of his own. "David was arrested this morning in Los Angeles. The hotel security footage clearly shows him entering your room and planting evidence. He's been charged with evidence tampering, child endangerment, and violating the restraining order." Sarah continued stroking her daughter's cheek, finding comfort in the connection. "How long will he be in prison?" "His lawyer is pushing for a plea deal, but with the theft from your trust fund, the arson charges, and now the evidence tampering, he's looking at a minimum of 8 years. Emma joined them, carrying coffee and sandwiches from the hospital cafeteria. "I brought sustenance for the vigil." "What vigil?" "The one where we sit here and watch this beautiful baby girl get stronger every day until she's ready to come home with her mama." Over the next 6 weeks, that's exactly what they did. Sarah spent every allowed minute at her daughter's bedside, reading to her, talking to her, and slowly watching her grow stronger. James used the time to rebuild their lives in more tangible ways. He found Sarah a small house to rent near the hospital, furnished it with everything she and the baby would need, and set up a college fund that would ensure baby Sarah's education was secure. "Your mother would have loved this," he told Sarah one afternoon as they watched the baby's latest attempts to breathe without assistance. "She always said the Collins women were fighters. She was right about that." Robert Thompson visited regularly with updates on David's legal situation. The evidence against him had grown overwhelming as investigators dug deeper into his past. "We found evidence connecting him to his first wife's death," Thompson reported during one visit. "She had filed for divorce and was planning to leave him when she died in that suspicious fall. The insurance investigation was never properly completed." Will he be charged with murder? The district attorney is reviewing the case, but even without that, he's facing 25 to life under California's 3 strikes law. On a sunny Tuesday morning in November, Dr. Martinez delivered the news Sarah had been praying for. She's ready to go home. Baby Sarah now weighed 5 pounds and 3 ounces, could breathe on her own, and had developed the strength to nurse properly. She was still small, but she was healthy and strong. As Sarah buckled her daughter into the car seat for the first time, she reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. 6 months ago, she'd been a powerless woman clipping coupons in a tiny apartment. Today, she was a mother with resources, family support, and a future full of possibilities. The house James had found for them was perfect, small but comfortable, with a nursery painted in soft yellows and greens. Emma had taken leave from her job to help with the transition, and James visited daily to check on his great niece. "She has your mother's eyes," James said one evening as he held the baby while Sarah prepared dinner, "and hopefully her intelligence. Definitely her strength. Look what she's already survived. That night, as Sarah nursed her daughter in the quiet nursery, she thought about the conversation she'd had with Detective Rodriguez earlier that day. David Mitchell pled guilty to all charges. He'd told her, "He'll serve 15 years minimum, with the possibility of additional charges if the murder investigation yields results." Sarah had expected to feel triumphant hearing that news. Instead, she felt something she hadn't anticipated: pity. David had thrown away everything: his freedom, his family, his future, because he couldn't accept that someone else might have power he couldn't control. In the end, his need to dominate had destroyed him completely. But Sarah wasn't going to waste energy feeling sorry for him. She had better things to focus on. 1 year later, Sarah stood in the conference room of Collins Family Trust, addressing a room full of board members who managed the family's charitable foundation. Baby Sarah, now a healthy toddler, played quietly with blocks in a corner of the room while her mother conducted business. The Elizabeth Collins Memorial Scholarship Fund has awarded full college scholarships to 37 young women this year, Sarah reported, reading from her presentation notes. Each recipient was selected based on academic merit and demonstrated financial need. The board members, including James and Emma, nodded approvingly. Sarah had discovered that having money meant having the power to help others in ways she'd never imagined possible. "I also want to discuss expanding our domestic violence intervention program," Sarah continued. "Last month alone, we helped 14 women and their children escape abusive situations and establish independent lives." After the meeting, Sarah walked through downtown Riverside with her daughter, enjoying the California sunshine and the simple pleasure of being free. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maria Santos, the private investigator who had become a close friend. "David's parole hearing scheduled for 2035. Thought you should know." Sarah deleted the message without responding. David was part of her past, not her future. "Mama, park," baby Sarah announced, pointing to the playground ahead. "Yes, sweetheart. Let's go to the park." As her daughter played on the swings, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her life had changed. The trust fund had grown to over $4 million through careful investment, ensuring financial security for generations. But more important than the money was the family she'd found. James had become the father figure she'd never had, providing wisdom and stability. Emma had moved closer and taken a job at the local hospital, wanting to be near her sister and niece. Together, they'd created the loving, supportive family environment Sarah had always craved. "Higher, Mama, baby Sarah," called from the swing. "Hold on tight, baby girl." Sarah pushed her daughter higher, listening to her delighted laughter and marveling at how pure joy sounded. This little girl would grow up knowing she was loved, knowing she was strong, and knowing she had the resources to make her own choices in life. That evening, after baby Sarah had been fed, bathed, and tucked into bed, Sarah sat in her home office reviewing applications for the latest round of scholarship awards. Each application told a story of a young woman trying to overcome obstacles and build a better life. One application particularly caught her attention. Jessica Martinez, age 18, had grown up in foster care and was working 2 jobs to pay for community college while maintaining a 4.0 grade average. Sarah smiled and moved Jessica's application to the accepted pile. The Collins family had always believed in investing in strong women, and that tradition would continue. Her phone rang, interrupting her work. The caller ID showed Robert Thompson's number. "Sarah, I wanted to update you on David's situation. He's been denied parole and will serve his full sentence. The murder charges in his first wife's death were dropped due to insufficient evidence, but he won't be eligible for release until 2039. Thank you for letting me know. There's something else. David's been trying to contact you through his lawyer. He claims he's found religion in prison and wants to apologize." Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering her response. I don't want to hear from him. Robert, not now, not ever. Please make that clear to his lawyer. Of course, you don't owe him anything. Sarah, not forgiveness, not reconciliation, nothing. After hanging up, Sarah walked to her daughter's nursery and watched her sleep. In the soft glow of the nightlight, baby Sarah looked like an angel, her tiny chest rising and falling with each peaceful breath. You're going to grow up knowing you're loved, Sarah whispered. You're going to know you're strong, and you're never going to let anyone make you feel small. Outside, the evening breeze rustled the leaves of the oak tree James had planted in their backyard to replace the one destroyed in the fire. It was still small, but it was growing steadily, its roots deepening with each passing season. Sarah thought about her mother, Elizabeth Collins, who had died believing her daughters would struggle through life without family support. Elizabeth couldn't have known that her death would eventually lead to Sarah finding not just financial security, but the family connections she'd always craved. The Collins women were indeed fighters. They survived, they thrived, and they used their strength to lift others up. As Sarah prepared for bed, she reflected on the most important lesson she'd learned from her ordeal with David, the difference between having money and having power. David had seen her trust fund as something to steal, a resource to be exploited for his own benefit. But Sarah understood that true power came from using resources to create positive change in the world. The scholarships, the domestic violence programs, the investments in her daughter's future. These were how wealth became meaningful. Tomorrow, she would review more scholarship applications. She would visit with James and discuss expansion plans for the family foundation. She would play with her daughter and read her bedtime stories. She would continue building the life she'd always dreamed of having. David had tried to destroy her by taking away everything she thought mattered. Instead, he had freed her to discover what actually mattered: family, purpose, and the power to make a difference in other people's lives. Sarah smiled as she turned off the lights and headed to bed. Baby Sarah was stirring in her crib, making the soft sounds that meant she would be hungry soon. Sarah would feed her daughter, rock her back to sleep, and wake up tomorrow ready to face whatever challenges and opportunities the new day might bring. She was Sarah Collins Mitchell, survivor and fighter, mother and philanthropist. She had found her family, claimed her inheritance, and built a life worth living. And this was only the beginning.